Today I'm going to show you how to create a 2D top-down character controller inside Unity. To begin with, just so we don't confuse anyone watching this video, I just want to explain briefly what I already have inside my project here. The first thing I have is a very basic player model that I created inside Photoshop. I have the basic animations, which is just idle. I have walking sideways, I have walking up and down. I have all the different directions created inside just a basic Unity sprite sheet, which I then imported into Unity as a PNG file, which is inside my sprites folder. And I already went in and did my settings for it. I went into the sprite editor and I cut everything out. So everything when it comes to the player sprite is already prepared. After I did that, I just simply took the first idle animation frame and I sort of dragged it into my hierarchy. So I have a player character up here and I just renamed it to player. Inside my player, you can also see that I changed a couple of things inside the rigid body 2D. I went ahead and removed the gravity of my player by setting the gravity scale to 0 because we're doing a top-down game, meaning that the character should not fall down infinitely into some sort of ground. We're just like falling that way into the game, if that kind of makes sense. I also added a continuous collision detection because this is our player character and we don't want to accidentally fly through a wall somewhere. I also made sure to set the interpolate to interpolate because we want to make sure we have smooth animations when we're playing with the player character inside our game. And that's basically it. I do also want to make sure I add a C constraint so we don't accidentally rotate our player. That's probably a good idea. And with that, I just simply added a simple player controller script to my player as well. And I simply put that into my scripts folder. So we just have a very basic player controller script, which has absolutely nothing inside of it right now. As you can see, there's nothing in here, just so everyone can get started and be in the same spot with me in this video here. Now, I will have timestamps in the description of this video as well as inside the timeline of the video, so you can just sort of fast forward to any part that you want to get to. We're going to do the animation of our character when we walk the different directions at the very end. And right now, we're going to build the actual player controller so we can actually control our character going up and down, left and right and all that. So with that said, inside our player controller, the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to add our rigid body to our controller so we can actually grab the player's physics and actually do something with it, like changing the velocity of the player. So inside here, I'm just going to make a comment that says components. And underneath here, I'm just simply going to grab the rigid body. So we're going to say we have a rigid body 2D type component, called it RB. And then I also want to add a couple of information things about the player inside our script here. So we're going to say player in a comment. And in here, I want to add a walk speed because we need to have a speed in our player. We also want to have a limiter on our player so we don't walk past a certain speed at some point. This is going to make sense once we do actually get to the vertical movement, meaning, not left and right, up and down, but the in-between movements, because as a default, you will move a little bit faster if you don't put a limiter. So that is something that we need to use that for. So going in here, we're going to start out with a float, which is going to be our walk speed. I'm going to set this one equal to 4. Then we're going to have a float called a limiter. Actually, we can say a speed limiter. I'm going to set this one to 0.7. And this is something you can change if you want to do that. This is what I found to work for me when it comes to setting a limiter on our vertical movements. Then afterwards, we're going to set a float. We're going to say input horizontal. And then we're going to duplicate it and say input vertical, so we can get the vertical movements as well. And that's basically all we need to have for now when we just want to move the player. So going inside our start method, the first thing I want to do is I want to actually grab the rigid body component of this game object here. So I want to say I have my rigid body, which is equal to this game object dot get component. And I just simply want to grab the rigid body 2D. So now we're actually grabbing the component on our player object inside the game. So with this, we can actually get started on the movements. Now for this, we do need to do two things. We need to have a update method and we also need to have a fixed update. And this is basically because when it comes to anything physics related inside Unity, we need to put it inside the physics update, which is the fixed update. And this is just basically so we don't mess up our player movement based on what the frame rate might be of the person playing the game. So we need to make sure we put everything movement related when it comes to physics inside fixed update. So with that, we're going to go inside update, and I'm just simply going to say input horizontal is going to be equal to input dot get axis raw parentheses, and I want to get the horizontal one, which means that we can now move the player with A, D, left and right on the keyboard. This is by default set inside the Unity Inspector. If you want to change that, you can do that inside the Unity settings. For now, we're just going to keep it like it is. And I'm going to duplicate it and just simply say we want to have the input vertical and then change it to vertical. So now basically this is going to be 0, 1, or -1, depending on if we're actually going left and right, up and down. And this is all we have to do inside update, because now we actually want to move the player. This is just to grab the input based on what we might be clicking on the keyboard. But now since we're actually going to be moving our player using physics, like I said, we need to do that inside fixed update. So inside fixed update, I'm going to create an if statement. And I'm simply going to check if the horizontal input is not equal to 0, meaning that we're not standing still when it comes to the horizontal direction, or if we're standing still when it comes to the vertical input. And this is actually something that is a little bit different with top-down 2D games, because we can do it in this way since we just need to check for direction and no jumping. So this is going to look a little bit different if you're used to just regular platforming 2D games. After we do this, we can actually go inside of here, and we can actually go ahead and just move the player. So I'm going to say rigid body dot velocity, and do notice that we're using velocity instead of using, go back to 2, there we go. We're using velocity instead of add force, because when it comes to top downs, we usually want the player to stop immediately when we're not pressing any buttons on the keyboard. There was a person who asked me, what is the difference between velocity and add force? Basically, add force adds a force onto the existing movement of your player. So if your player is moving already and you add force in your code, it basically adds an additional force to the player. Whereas velocity sets the total velocity of the player. So if the player is moving already and then you click the velocity to be something specific, it stops any existing movement on the player and just simply moves the player in that speed you set the velocity to. So that's the main difference there. With that, we're just going to go ahead and say we want the vector 2 to be input horizontal, which is either going to be 1, 0, or -1. And we want to multiply it with our walk speed, which we have up here. Then I want to say comma, and just simply do the same thing for the input on the vertical axis, like so. And this is actually going to work. So if I were to go inside my Unity Inspector and actually test this out, we'll actually notice that we do have movement going. So I can actually move, but you'll notice something a little bit weird, which is that right now well, first of all, he's not stopping, but his vertical movement is actually much faster than his sideways and up and down movement. That's something we do need to fix. So, going inside our code again, I'm just simply going to make an else statement to make sure the player actually stops so we're not pressing anything. And I'm just simply going to set the rigid body velocity to 0. I'm going to say 0 and 0. So now he doesn't move when we're letting go of the keyboard. So once we have that, I want to put a limiter on my movement if I move vertically. So I'm going to go down inside my if statement, the one where we actually moved the player, and I'm going to create another if statement. Inside of here, I want to actually copy paste what I have up here, but instead of or, I'm actually checking for a and, because if this is true, it means that I'm both pressing a vertical direction and a horizontal direction. It's the other way. Horizontal or vertical direction is being pressed at the same time. If that happens, I want to limit the speed, because right now, whatever the walk speed is actually being doubled because we're pressing 2 directions at the same time. So we want to limit that. In my experience, 70% of the doubled speed is roughly what we need to have for it to look somewhat normal. So going inside of here, I actually want to take the input horizontal, multiply equal, which means that we're actually taking itself and multiplying with something else. So we're going to say we want to do that with our speed limiter, like so. Then I want to duplicate it and do the same thing for the input vertical. So now we're limiting the speed on both the horizontal and vertical axis, so when they're put together, we don't run twice as fast in the vertical direction. So with this, I can go back inside Unity, press play. The first thing you're going to notice is that I can actually stop again. He's not just continuing. And when I walk vertically, we're walking roughly the same speed. So it's not like we have to, you know, do something weird. The character is not doing anything weird now. He's running at the same speed no matter which direction we're running at. The next thing we need to do is we need to add some animation to it. And like I said, I do already have a sprite with all the different animation components. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and click my player, click the animation tab, and create a new animation. Then I'm going to go inside my assets folder, right click, new, animation, with an S behind it, go in here, and I'm just going to say I want to create a new folder called player, just to have a little bit of hierarchy going on in here. So player, and then I want to create a new name for the actual animation. This one should be player_idle, and save it. So now we have a idle animation that we can start adding stuff into. So I'm just going to drag my project window over so I can actually see all my different sprites. And as you can see, I already have them all divided up. So this top bar up here is just my basic idle animation. So that's the first 4 sprites. So I can say I have 1 through 3 and just sort of drag it in here. And we can also just drag it out so we have a little bit of space. So just a basic idle animation. I'm just going to go ahead and create my animations. And again, if yours look different, just go ahead and create the animation however you may like it. I'm just going to go ahead and take some time here to create what I think looks good. I think this right here is a bit more comfortable. And once I'm done with this one, I'm just simply going to click here, say create new clip, and then create a new one called player walk_left. I'm just going to go ahead and save this one. And then I'm just simply going to add in the animations for walking left. I'm also going to add in for a walking right. I'm also going to do one for walking down and one for walking up. So walking in each of the directions basically. And then of course the idle animation. So I'm just going to do this at my own pace. You can go ahead and do yours at your own pace. And then we'll meet after we're done creating these 5 animations that we want to create. Now, once you have all the animations, so right now I have player idle, walk down, walk left, right, and up. I also want to make sure I go inside the Animator inspector here. And we're actually going to go and do this a little bit different than you may be used to, because we're not going to go in and start, creating transitions between all these different animations, because it's going to create a huge mess. And there's a much easier way to do animations when it comes to Unity, which I can't really see any sort of negative benefits from. It's a method that I know a lot of other game developers use. Instead, we're going to go into our code and control everything using code. This may freak some people out because you may be used to doing it inside the Animator, but I do promise you this is much more simple to do inside your code. Going inside the code, I will go ahead and create a new method, which is going to be void change animation state, parentheses. I do also want to create a comment. So we say animation state changer, just so we know what this is. And inside the parentheses, I do want to pass in a string. This string here is basically just going to handle if the animation in the next frame is the same as the previous frame. Then we just don't want to do anything. We don't want to change the animation. Just let the current animation just keep running. We don't want to change anything. That's all that is going to do. So inside of here, I want to pass in a string, and I'm just going to call this one new state. Now, before we do anything else inside the actual method, I do want to go back up to the top here, and I want to create a new section of data. This is going to be the one that handles our animation changer. Actually, let's go ahead and call this one animations and state, since that is basically what we're going to put up here. The first thing I want to do is I actually want to grab the animator that is on this current game object, which is the player. So I want to say we have a animator I'm just going to call this one Animator. Then I also want to create a string called current state because we want to save what exactly the current animation running is, so we don't do the same animation again in the next frame if we have the same animation running already. So this is basically just to prevent that we run a specific animation again and again and again if it is currently running, because there's no need to. And it's just going to loop our animation in some sort of weird way if we don't add this in. So current state is going to be something that we want to add. We could actually make this even easier and say current anim state. And the last thing I want to do up here is I just want to add in all the different animation states that we've created inside Unity. So right now we have 5, we have idle, and then we have all the 4 directions that we might want to walk. So I want to create a constant, which is a variable that we can't change at any point, or at least it's going to throw us an error if we try to change this at any point, because we're not going to be changing this. So we might as well just make this constant. So I'm going to create a constant, and I'm going to say we want this to be a string. And I want to say the name of the actual animation. So right now we have player underscore idle, which I capitalized all the way through because it's a constant. It's just a habit we have inside of C# or any other type of code. And I want to set this equal to a string, which is the name of the state that we added inside Unity. So right now, if we were to go back inside Unity, you can see this one is called player underscore idle with a big P and a big I in my case here. So I'm going to go back inside my code and call it player underscore idle. Then I'm going to duplicate this. And I want to say that this next one is going to be player walk left. And then I just want to change this one to player walk underscore left. And just simply change it all the way through, like so. And then we change it to right, up, and down. Up and down. So it should look like this. I have a feeling I made this even more confusing with all the clicking and the pasting. It should look like this when you're done. And once we have this, we just simply need to call upon the particular animation state that we want to run at a certain point inside our code, and it will actually run. So with that, let's go back down to our change animation state. And in here, I want to do a if statement. And this entire if statement is just simply going to ask the question, is the new animation that we're calling upon in the next frame the same animation as the previous frame? If it is, then we don't want to do anything. We just return, and we don't do anything else inside this method here because we're doing what we want to do. We're running the animation that we do want to be running. So in here, I'm going to say if the current state is equal to the new state that we're passing in, then I just simply want to return and not do anything. And again, we can always add a comment here so we know what we're doing. Stop animation from repeating itself. Actually, interrupting would be better. So interrupting itself. However, if the new animation is a different animation than the one we have running already, then I just simply want to play the new animation. So I'm going to say I want to grab the animator. And I want to say we also want to play. And then the name of the animation, which is the new state. So I'm going to pass that in here. Now, of course, we do need to make sure that we grab the animator component off the player. We haven't done that yet, so we'll do that at the very end once we're done with this method here. And again, we can always add a comment that says play new animation. And then we, of course, also want to update the current animation or the current state. So we're going to say update current state. So we're going to say current state is equal to new state. Like so. This is all we need to do. And now we basically have a method that handles everything when it comes to our animation. So going back up to the top, we do want to make sure the animator is being grabbed off the player, because that is important, equal to GameObject dot get component, and then make sure we grab the Animator, like so. And of course, make sure we put that the right place. So this was the hard part. At least I think so. Once you have this going, we basically have everything we need to actually have inside our game. So what I can do is I can take the change animation state method, and if I were to walk a certain direction, actually let's go ahead and make the default state idle. So if I'm not walking any sort of direction, then we want to call upon the method, and we want to make sure that the current state should be idle. So I'm going to take my constant called player idle, pass it in, like so, which is basically just going to play the idle animation. This means that now if I were to go inside my Unity inspector and actually play the game, you'll notice that it should by default just be the idle animation. And of course, it would be that no matter if I did the code or not, because it is just going to play this as a default, but it is actually calling upon this inside the code. So now going inside the code, we basically just need to call upon this method and call on the animation state that we want to run at a certain moment. So if I currently have my player, let's actually go down here below. If my player is walking sideways, I want to take the sideways animation and have that as my priority. So if I'm walking vertically, upwards to the right, I want the right walking animation to play, even though I'm walking vertically, because I don't have a particular animation for vertical movement. If you have that, just go ahead and add a new constant up here with the vertical movement animations that you might have created inside the inspector, and just use that instead. But in my case, I just want to walk sideways with my animation when I walk vertically. So I'm going to create an if statement and prioritize the horizontal movement. So if input horizontal, and I actually want to make sure I check if I'm walking left or if I'm walking right. So in this case here, I want to check if it is greater than 0, it means that I'm walking to the right direction. So I want to copy paste, change animation state, and just say I'm walking to the right. Paste that in. Then I just simply copy, paste it down, and if it's lesser than 0, it means that I'm walking to the left side. So I'm going to say less than 0 and just simply change this to left. This should also, by the way, be an else if statement, just so we don't have any sort of mess ups. And then I also want to make sure that we go down and say, but if we don't have any sort of input in the horizontal axis and we're only walking up or only walking down, then I want to make sure that I check if my input vertical is greater than 0, which means that I'm walking upwards now, not vertically, not horizontally, but just upwards. Then I want to walk up. Then I copy paste it down, and say if it is lesser than, then I'm walking down. That's basically it. We don't need to do any sort of conditions inside the animation state machine inside Unity. You know, there's no mess in there. We can just simply do it using code. So if I go back inside my game and actually play, you can see that I'm walking to the left, I'm walking up, I'm walking down, and everything is working perfectly inside my game. Like I said, I'm just prioritizing walking sideways when I walk vertically. Not vertically, on an axis. So this is basically working like it should. Now, some people might be asking, so why would we want to do this using code instead of, using the animator and, doing all this stuff in here? I did ask about this, and the reply that I got was that the animator visual component, the one that I have right here inside Unity, is basically for people when they're starting to learn about the animator states and how they work and how you can connect them with the transitions and all that type of thing. Of course, if you're still comfortable using this and you would rather do that than doing it through code, then you can still use it because it is a tool inside the Unity engine. But it is just sort of preferred, from my understanding, that people who make games think it's a lot easier just to create a state machine inside their code and just simply do animations in this type of way. So again, with this, we have a basic top-down movement script that will actually move the player working, and everything is like it should be. So with that, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next video.